and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your hosts, Buddy Sotelo Esquire and Dr. Mike Leno, wrestling's famous and most original photographer. But the most interesting guest that I could possibly think of for this week is a man that I once called boss, a man that ran, to me, my favorite wrestling federation of all time that I was a part of, California Championship Wrestling's owner, former owner anyway, Charles Marquez, the boss. It is great to have you on the show today. Thank you for coming.
Buddy, thank you for having me. Dr. Mike, good to be here with you as well.
Yes, so you're also a listener of our show. I know that you're one of the proud dozen, that we get every week. So it's nice. It's good to get you back on the show.
Millions.
Yes. So you were just about to tell us before we got on the show here about your beginnings in wrestling and how you first got interested in pro wrestling. So why don't you tell all of our listeners about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was saying briefly off air, so my first experience, I was looking at, I used to see the Ring magazine, KO magazine for boxing. That was an interest when I was growing up. But in the same newsstand, they used to have the brand new Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and they used to have just various magazines. And I remember buying that first magazine and just reading through it. And shortly thereafter, probably a year, 2 years after that, is we were very fortunate where I grew up in the Bay Area that we had WTBS. And so you guys remember, as well as I do, the hottest thing in wrestling back in 1981 was, of course, Tommy Wildfire Rich. And
Mid-South. They had Mid-South on.
Georgia Championship. But the other stuff might have been on there on the TBS. But so were you watching before he started feuding with Buzz Sawyer, like the Ted DiBiase, Kevin Sullivan?
Yeah, and so I didn't. And I'll tell you why. For me, growing up, the time period of probably 1981 till 1984, and then, of course, I, like the rest of the world, switched over to WWF back then when that whole rock and wrestling connection hit. But I'll give you guys just a quick sequence on that. So I was first hit with the Tommy Wildfire Rich stuff, and, of course, you were hit with that. Plus, you were hit with Gordon Soley and, Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and all of that amazing stuff. Fast forward a little bit after that, 1982, you guys remember David Letterman came on, and I want to say February of 1982. And at the time, I was a huge fan of the TV show Taxi. And, of course, Andy Kaufman had been on, that show Fridays with, I believe, Michael Kramer. And, Andy Kaufman was the hottest comedian.
Michael Richards.
And then here comes the Jerry Lawler stuff, right? And then that thing was such a huge thing because it was on David Letterman. So, of course, it was national. And then fast forward a little bit more, another key event that happened was my brother-in-law took me to go see Rocky III. And there he was himself, Hulk Hogan. But at the time, as you guys remember as well, in the Bay Area, there was TV 20. So we were actually watching Bay Area TV 20. And at the time, that program was the hottest thing around. I remember like it was yesterday when Johnny Valiant brought out Hulk Hogan, and week after week, I think he initially started with his back to the camera, then a side profile, then the other profile, and then all the stuff that he was doing with Nick Bockwinkel and so forth. And so there was just that couple of year period where you're getting, and at the time you don't draw the distinction between these different companies. You're just seeing the stuff on TV as a kid that's unbelievably entertaining. And, imagine that 3-year period. You get the Tommy Wildfire Rich stuff. You got the Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler stuff. You got the Hulk Hogan and the AWA stuff. And then you roll into the rock and wrestling connection in WrestleMania 1985. So there was that 4 or 5 year period for me that I don't know that there's anything that will ever recapture that gold, at least in terms of that time period and across the spectrum, not just one wrestling company, but just many wrestling companies. And so I would say that that is really what cemented my love for professional wrestling, is that period when I was a kid.
Charles, let me ask you quickly, because Channel 20 Coffee, TV 20, owned by, I can't remember the guy's name now, but TV 20, you're talking about the AWA show, Vern Gagne's show, but also WWF show. So they aired on opposite days. One was like on Saturday, which I think was AWA, and then Superstars, the syndicated WWF Sundays, if I'm not mistaken. I wish you had. Did you grow up in San Jose? Is that where
I did, actually.
One of those towns.
Yeah. So after, I was originally from the Central Valley, and then I moved to San Jose when I was a kid. So actually, on that note, Dr. Mike, my first live show was at the Cow Palace, actually. And I remember, I'll never forget it. It was Sheik Adnan El Casey was there. And I don't remember all the other people. The reason that I specifically remember Sheik Adnan El Casey is because my parents actually got more, just in terms of the entertainment value, of the people that were sitting around us who were absolutely losing their minds when Sheik Adnan El Casey was doing his shtick. So I specifically remember that, but the Cow Palace was great.
It's too bad, because Roy, if you just had come a little bit earlier, that was one of Roy Shire's towns. Obviously, the Cow Palace was his main venue, and he closed up shop, retired, exposed the business to the local newspapers here in LA, January of '82. But he ran shows weekly, bi-weekly, every 3 weeks, depending on the town. Sacramento, Modesto, Stockton, Oakland at the Kaiser Center. San Jose was run by former NWA world champion, who was Roy Shire's policeman, meaning a guy, a shooter, hooker, if somebody had the belt on them and started, disobeying Roy's rules, that's what a policeman was. He would stretch him. But John Swensky ran San Jose Civic for Roy. And there was amazing stuff like 10 years before that, the Ray Stevens versus Pat Patterson, Pat and Rocky Johnson as Roy's tag champs against all kinds of guys. But also at that time period, I don't know if you got Financial News Network, Russ was right, buddy, that Jerry Lawler's and Jerry Jarrett's promotion from Memphis aired every week on so we had WTBS airing Georgia Championship, but also a lesser channel, Financial News Network, was airing the Memphis shows, like the famous angle where Eddie Gilbert ran over Jerry Lawler with his car out in the parking lot of the TV studio there, which had the highest rating. 1 in 3 people, you can imagine, for years and years in Memphis, and I'll throw back to you guys, 1 in 3 people was watching that 10 a.m. Saturday Memphis show. It was incredible. You wouldn't get that anywhere else, numbers like that. It was insane, and that's why they went on. And you can watch it tonight. A&E's, they're airing the biography on Jerry Lawler. And so they were going into all that magical Andy Kaufman stuff. One quick thing, though, on Saturday Night Live. Now, Fridays was the knockoff show on ABC of Saturday Night Live. But Andy went on, and he was doing his wrestling against the women. But one of those times, and I'm looking for that episode, I can't find it on YouTube, Buddy Rogers, who was one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, past the Nature Boy, thank the Flair, managed Kaufman on the Saturday Night Live show when he was, pulling an audience member female up there and beating her. So that was a magical period of time. The wrestling's always been magical. Now you've got more promotions. You look at who's behind you: AEW, MLW, New Japan, WWE and its farm system, NXT, NWA, Billy Corgan's group. There's like 2 to 3 to 4 hours of wrestling on every night, 3 hours on Sundays now, even.
Yeah, I love it. I love the fact that there are so many, that there's more than one game in town. It's not only just good for the fans, it's not only just good for us, it's actually good for the wrestlers as well. I was reading an article this morning on a recent tweet that Tony Khan had done regarding, what they spend in terms of the hotels and the shuttling and so forth with the wrestlers. And at the end of the day, that competition is great when it comes to that, because you get I would say that one of the down periods, in my opinion, for wrestling, you went from that period where you had the Monday Night Wars, and that was just the hottest thing out there. That was must see TV every week. And then a couple years later, you had Vince McMahon buying up ECW, you had him buying WCW up, and it just, everything dried up. But in addition to that, so did the quality of the product, because they were the only game in town. I love the fact that their wrestlers are able to go to different companies and show their talent, and the fact, and maybe something that we'll get into later, Buddy, as far as, you know, when we were running the California Championship Wrestling, but an amazing thing happened after 2007, and that was the smartphone and the technology and how things have evolved. You know, there's obviously good and bad with social media, but in terms of people being able to do things, you know, running a promotion, I think, is always going to be difficult at the independent level. But I think with the advances in technology, you know, cameras aren't as expensive, and just the different things that when, you know, Buddy and I and JJ were doing what we were doing, gosh, back in 2006, a lot of the equipment was just cost prohibitive. And so I think that's one of the good things about that. And of course, all these different companies is just good for everybody.
So, Russ, did you ask him if he ever came to either Roland shows or Kirk White shows prior to the formation of CCW?
So I did, actually. So I had gone to an APW show. I think I actually had gone to a couple of APW shows. Just I had heard the buzz about them and, you know, the gym wars. And so I went out to one of them. My brother-in-law, I believe, and I went to a couple of them. And there was one, and I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Gosh, it escapes me. I know you guys know this, but the match was out in the parking lot, and these guys, you know, getting slammed on the
freeway with Vic Grimes, Donovan Morgan, and Gigolo Steve Rosano.
I'm not. I remember those guys for sure. It was
they were outside, and the Leprechaun Aaron O'Grady, who I can't remember if he was healed by that point.
Wrestle, yeah. Well,
this thing over one of them with a car.
You know who the guy was? It was Max Justice. Is that correct, Buddy?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so there was, I'm not kidding you. So I go to this thing with my brother-in-law, and you guys remember the gym wars. You know, when the action was going outside, everybody in the audience followed, and not everybody, but a lot of people in the audience followed outside. And I remember this particular match, Max Justice put somebody on the hood of the car. I mean, obviously slammed him through the hood or on the hood of the car. And people were just losing their minds. It was just unbelievable.
It was out in a business park, and so it was insane. You have all these people there, and yeah, they would go out in the driveway and on the streets and sidewalks and restaurants. There was lots. There were several. It wasn't just one. You know, so it might have been the one you went to was a different one where they all went outside. They even had a women's brawl, just two women that were going up and down the street outside of the gym facility.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Dr. Mike, on BTW, I think primarily those, and I'd gone to a couple of those shows, and I think the reason I went, which probably why a lot of people went, is because they used to always have the signings, or they'd have, you know, where you get the pictures with the guys, with the stars from the 80s and so forth. And so I think a lot of people used to go to those shows just to get the pictures with, I think the Honky Tonk Man was on those a lot. There was a handful of people that were on fairly regularly, and I think a lot of people like myself used to go there just to be able to do the meet and greet with a lot of those guys that we used to watch.
So from starting out with liking wrestling as a younger man, then you went into the military and you did some time as in the military. You're a captain, right?
I'm a lieutenant colonel still.
You're a lieutenant colonel now.
Yeah.
Oh my God! So yeah, you know, Captain Lou was only Captain Lou in title, but you were actually really Captain Charles for a while, and then now you're. So explain a little bit about your military experience.
Yeah, so actually, you know, living in Newman after we moved back from the Bay Area back to the Central Valley, I'd been there back in the Valley, back home for a while. You know, I was working in a member of the Assembly's office. I was interning in a member of Congress's office and just getting involved in politics. on the tail end of my high school in San Jose, I started becoming interested in politics. So that carried over when I moved back. And so I had worked for these gentlemen in their offices. And so just started working in that, and started getting involved in my local community there in Newman. And one thing led to another. I was involved in the community, and ended up running for city council. You know, small town at the time. The town was about 5,500, 6,000 people. We're talking 1992, and 22-year-old kid running for office, and I won. And I subsequently won a few more times after that, and ended up becoming the mayor. So I'll tell you a twist on it. So really enjoyed being in politics a lot. Still love politics, of course. You and I have talked many, many times, buddy, about that. But I had wanted to join the military. I had done 1 year in JROTC at Oak Grove High School in San Jose, and I really liked it. Unfortunately, I had a health problem when I was 19, almost 20, and it was a collapsed lung. And so it essentially precluded me from actually joining the military. And so I'll never forget, I was doing the politics later, and I went back, actually, Cal State Stanislaus there in Turlock, and I went back to finish my degree. A good friend of mine who was also going back, he was prior military, going back to just wrap up and finish his degree. He and I were just talking one day, and I mentioned to him just my regret of not joining the military, and we talked. And of course, he had asked me why I regretted it so much, and I just said, I've been involved now. At the time, I said I've been involved now for almost 10 years in politics, and I travel to different places with the members, or I see the different members who are on Veterans Affairs committees or going to town halls talking to veterans and so forth. And a lot of them don't serve, and that's the case of the legislature and Congress. And I said, I don't want to be that person who is dealing with military issues, and I can't say that I've walked in their shoes. Anyway, long story short, guys, the friend of mine, Mario from Brez, I remember this conversation like it was yesterday.
We got 45 minutes, so you can do the long story if you want.
Awesome. Yeah. So he says to me, he says, well, why do you join the reserve, right? And I said, what's the reserve? Anyway, long story short, I did my due diligence, went to see a recruiter, and we talked. And he said, well, I'm going to need about he said, I'm going to need all this documentation, obviously with your health problem that you had. And so 6 months later, he calls me back and he says, hey, you've been cleared. So, and at the time, I was going to be running for re-election as the mayor of my town or go to the military. And so I basically announced that I wasn't running for re-election, and I left for basic training because I felt, for me anyway, that I wanted to basically go through basic training, start at the lowest rank so I could work my way up. And I knew at some point I wanted a commission, which I did 4 years later. And I've been in the military ever since. I'm a reservist. I work as my civil service is actually as a full-time squadron commander here at Travis Air Force Base, and love it. No regrets. I obviously still keep up to date with what's going on in politics, and and I try to stay informed. Obviously, as a concerned citizen, I stay informed on what's happening. But I would say the two loves, other than my wife, of course, and my children, are politics and wrestling. So if you go on my Twitter page, you'll see that I have politics and wrestling, and those are essentially the two things that you'll see me talk about or comment on. But I love it. I've been a wrestling fan now for over 40 years, and absolutely love it. I will tell you guys how I really got back into it, because as you guys know,
that was my next question, so you just lead right on into it. Perfect.
Yeah, sure. So as you guys know, and you probably more than all of us, Dr. Mike, because you've had such a up close and personal view of the action, but wrestling goes through cycles. you'll get this amazing stuff happening like we had talked about at the beginning, with all these different companies, with all these wonderful things happening. Then you'll have this consolidation where you've got one company that's essentially gobbled everybody up, and then you'll have, companies coming back around again, like thankfully you're seeing now. And I will tell you the thing that brought me back to it. And I always watch WrestleMania. I always watch the big pay-per-views. I was very happy to see AEW come online last few years. But I will tell you, I constantly have stayed in contact with JJ, of course, as you have, buddy. We've been friends for a very long time with him. But a couple of events happened in the last year, I would say. Number one, this incredible storyline that the WWE has going right now with the Bloodline and everything leading up to WrestleMania. This has been some of the best stuff that I've seen in a very long time. And then the other thing that happened, which was very tragic, was the untimely passing of Jay Briscoe. And I remember hearing about that, and I had already done a couple of shows with JJ and Scott. And so I basically had heard about it, and I obviously know about Ring of Honor, and a lot of the old shows and a lot of the old guys that they had on there. I know just from watching. And so then I went back and I just started refamiliarizing myself with Ring of Honor. I went back and looked at the trilogy matches between FTR and the Briscoe brothers, of course, which were amazing. And just really started watching more and more YouTube stuff and looking at all the different programs that were out there, looking at a bunch of different clips. And I just kind of rekindled how much I love wrestling. I've recently I went to the New Japan show at the Civic back in, February. And then I just went.
See Mercedes Moné, that big deal.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I, New Japan is relatively new to me. And so I was watching the Wrestle Kingdom stuff, the clips, really fell in love with Okada and Kenny Omega. And so I started watching a lot of that. And then I just went, a couple week and a half ago, I went to the AEW show in Sacramento to see the Dynamite and then the Rampage taping. And they had the Elevation taping as well. So I got to see that in person. And unfortunately.
Let me ask you, though, how is the Elevation? Does that come on first? How is that run? Because that's, it's an internet show, but a lot of the talent that can't find time because it's difficult. There's only 2 hours of Dynamite, 1 hour Rampage. And so a lot of the talent that just can't find a place on TV, they get some time. And do those matches feel rushed, or do they feel like training matches? How do they feel to you when you saw them live?
Yeah, so the order that they went, they did Dark Elevation first, and then they did Dynamite, and then they did Rampage. So the tricky thing about the schedule is because they start at 4 p.m. So the crowd was probably maybe 60% full, and we're talking at the Golden One Credit Union place. So 17,000 people in downtown Sacramento at the arena. So it was maybe half full for the Elevation show. Buddy, I'll throw out a name from the past for you. So Vinny Massaro was on the card. And so he was there. And Brian Cage, of course, was on the card as well. 2 guys that both wrestled there at California Championship Wrestling. But it was a sparse, I would say, because people are still getting out of work at that hour. And then when Dynamite hit, probably a little bit after, it's live, so whatever, 5 o'clock start time. So it went live. And then once that's done, then Rampage is on, and for the Friday taping. And it was a bit long. I think they could have. It's tricky because you have such a light audience at the very beginning, and so the crowd isn't really as hot as they are an hour or so later. So that's the tricky thing.
Once the beer kicks in.
Yeah. That's.
Aren't they tired though at the end, because it's a real long day when you're seeing 3 different shows? You're sitting there for essentially 5 hours of wrestling.
It was close to it. It clocked in probably 4 hours, 45 minutes. I actually left midway through the main event, the Rampage main event at the end. I left midway through just because I thought, well, everybody's going to rush out of here in about 15 or so minutes. So I made the beeline for the exits. That way I could get to the parking garage and get on the freeway. But here's the thing. They haven't been around, obviously, anywhere close to WWE. They've been around 4 years, 4 years now. And I give them an A for effort, I'll say. Their shows, I think, can be better in terms of the continuity and some of those things. But I think once Tony Khan finally figures out that he really needs a booker that can basically set the storylines, and just I think he's just, based on everything I'm reading, and of course it's all based on what I read online and just all of this, but it seems like he's trying to do too much. That's a lot of shows, that's a lot of content, and I think that maybe he needs to use his resources a little bit. Maybe I could be wrong, but I'm just saying it from somebody who watched a live show, and I think it needs work. Now, going back a couple of weeks, I saw New Japan at the Civic, which, as you guys know, is a much smaller venue, but the show couldn't be any better. I thought it was phenomenal.
You get to see Okada and Tanahashi main event, which is, dream about. It was not like their other matches. It was on Access about a week ago.
Right.
Following Impact on Thursdays. There's always an hour of New Japan, which is very cool. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you got to watch it, if they cut or edit it, but they just look like they, and it might be the jet lag, but they were a little bit slower than, all of their matches I've seen from Japan proper or the Tokyo Dome, etc. And, but still, the aura, and you had guys and one guy that we're all close friends with, Tim Thatcher, who was in WWE's developmental, and then he had the match on AEW, but now he's, I think, part of New Japan. And so was Tim Thatcher at that? Wasn't he on that show too, or no?
He wasn't. He wasn't at that show.
The Impact World Champ, Josh Alexander, and Kushida. You get to see Kushida.
Uh-huh.
Pretty amazing. Can you go over the card as you recall it, what you thought of it? Like the women's match, the women's match that had Mercedes Moné taking the title. What were your thoughts on that?
That show was amazing. And so I'll go through it. I would say the three main matches. Well, first of all, let me back up really quickly. So, and I'm always looking to see what's coming around in terms of wrestling and what's in the area from San Francisco to Sacramento, San Jose, and just really looking in the area. And so I remember seeing, and I forget the time frame, but I remember seeing that there was a New Japan show in San Jose. And I'm not kidding you guys. I didn't believe it. First of all, I looked and I said, New Japan at the Civic Auditorium. I used to go there when I was a kid. We used to go to the boxing matches when they used to have boxing there a long time ago. And so I know the layout of the Civic very well. But I thought to myself, wait, yeah, I was like, there's no way that
they had the show at the Cow Palace that I shot, and it was the headline was Cody versus Omega. Yeah. But at the first and second match, the place wasn't even half full yet. So there was problem with the parking lot, and people, it was packed by the end and stuff. And then they go from that, and they've had several. Liger's Northern California retirement show was at the San Jose Civic maybe a year ago, or maybe even a little bit longer. So they've had several at the San Jose Civic. They've run a lot in Long Beach, California. Now they're running, I think, a theater off of Hollywood Boulevard. But the San Jose show that you got to see, I think, was the best of anything, whether I've seen them or not, in the state or been there physically.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. So I, of course, bought my ticket immediately. And, and they hadn't even announced all the matches yet. I want to say they had announced a couple of them, but they hadn't announced that Okada was going to be there.
No, they definitely didn't announce Okada. I don't think you guys knew all the amazing talent you were going to see, but, I don't know if you have the program nearby so you can read us. I don't know all the matches yet. I haven't, read my, speaking of Tony Khan schooling Dave Meltzer, which I think happened on that hotel issue thing. Mm-hmm. That you just saw online, a lot of us said, "Oh boy, Tony, Meltzer may not be the golden boy in Tony's mind anymore when he's talking about hotels or whatever. Because I know Tony does everything first class. We're living in an era right now of promoters, big time promoters. You had a heart when you were running, and you grew up as a fan, which is the right way in my mind. But Tony Khan and Billy Corgan, with the NWA, these are guys that are trying to do everything right, and they have the resources. They're big name,
right,
multi-millionaire type folks, but they really love it, as opposed to, say, Vince Jr., which, it's always been more money. You really never thought he loved his own business, because he was always trying to do ancillary stuff that was unrelated, the Bodybuilding Federation or the movies or the ICO Pro or the XFL, and those all failed, and he has to keep going back to the wrestling that he may not be fond of. But you can really tell through both of them, through their heart to the surface. Billy Corgan and Tony Khan love, and Court Bauer from MLW, a guy I've known for 30 plus years, they really love wrestling. And that's when it comes through. I mean, Tony is putting on this match he's got with El Hijo de Vikingo, which is the Viking's son, the original Viking, against, I think, Kenny Omega, dream match. No, they haven't even gotten that in Mexico. And Tony's putting on these incredible matches. Every one of his shows, mostly Dynamite, they're like pay-per-view quality.
right.
Doing quarterly pay-per-views. It's amazing. A lot of time, how many Raws have we slept through until Triple H finally got the reins and Vince had to take himself away with that scandal and all of that. And their TV has improved. I mean, it's hard to ask people, Russ would concur, I'm sure you might, with 3 hours on a Monday night, and you fast forward through stuff. But since Hunter's taken over, there's very little fast forwarding. You want to see a lot more of it. You want to hear promos that don't feel scripted. And you get unscripted promos in AEW and everywhere else. WWE, it's getting
storylines have just gotten a lot better too. They've become more compelling. But I wanted to have Charles.
What do they have left if Kenny goes over, and the obvious are going to have the Usos against Kevin Owens, Kevin Steen, and Sammy. And if they were to take the tag straps, I don't think both titles are changing, but I'm pretty sure it might go to Cody. But, and they can draw out this bloodline for another year at least. But when the bloodline angle goes away, which has been so crafted well by Paul Heyman, they better have something in place for that, because that's when Tony might be able to overtake him. And in some respects, I mean, the match quality, you can't touch AEW's matches. Very few are even on that level in WWE, but it's a whole different kind of, showbiz wrestling versus, what we like to call real pro wrestling.
Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to rewind you back, Charles, back to 2006, to when you decided to run your own wrestling federation. What made you decide? Because, I mean, so many of us are fans, but like the hardest thing I think to do in the universe is to run your own wrestling federation. So what made you decide to run your own wrestling fed?
Well, I could sum it up with 2 letters, JJ. Dr. Mike, I'm not sure if you know JJ.
Yeah, he's been a guest on our show.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I've known JJ. I'll give you guys a bit of a backstory. You may know this how well I know JJ. So I had mentioned earlier that when I was campaigning, I was 22. So I was going door to door, small town, like I said, 5,500, 6,000 people at the time. And I remember going down the street, down Q Street, actually. I remember this as well, like it was yesterday. And I was going door to door, leaving my campaign material, literature on the door knockers. And so I go to this particular door on Q Street. Nobody's there, right? So I see these kids that are playing in the front of the house. So I walk up to them. I'm like, hey, do you guys, the people that live here, are they going to be home? Or can you leave this with the people that live here? That's what it was. And so it was probably 3 or 4 kids. One of them, of course, was 12-year-old JJ, right? And I was 22 at the time. And so 12-year-old JJ, and I hand him the thing, and that guy has been doing characters and voices and all of that stuff forever. And so he did an impersonation. It was a Hulk Hogan impersonation, in fact. And I think he may have thrown out a Macho Man one as well. anyway, I remembered that because I thought it was cool because I loved wrestling at the time as well. And so anyway, left the door knocker there. Years later, there he was working at the local lumber yard, and I remember going in to get something from the local lumber yard there, and there he was, and I was like, "Hey, you're the kid from," and so we kind of started reminiscing and so forth, and he looked very similar to when he was younger, and we just became fast friends, talking about wrestling, and whenever I'd go into the lumber yard there, we'd talk about wrestling and so forth and so on. And just as years went on, he started getting involved in wrestling, doing commentating throughout different places. And, just one thing led to another. Years later, I was commuting back and forth at the time to Southern California. And we just, I think at that point, he had already been working with you, if I'm not mistaken, buddy. And just, next thing you know, we're thinking of putting some shows on there in Newman. Obviously, he and I were very familiar with the town. Obviously, he was as well. I know you were probably thinking, where in the world is Newman, California, right? And so, just one thing led to another. We started putting some shows on. I think it went really well. Unfortunately, we decided to do it right before the worst economy in, since the Great Depression. We started, I believe it was the latter part of 2006, and then the Great Recession happened in 2008. And it was just, the timing was horrible. But as you remember, buddy, the shows we were doing there in town, one of them that we had at actually one of the halls there, that wasn't even our own venue. We had it at a hall, and there was, I want to say, 300 plus people.
Portuguese Hall, yeah, the Portuguese Hall was tremendous.
Yeah, and we were getting good, consistent crowds, but much like COVID, if you fast forward till a couple of years ago, much like COVID, the Great Recession was just absolutely devastating for people. And we were on Comcast On Demand. We were doing really good things. We had, we had guys on our cards that are on TV now. Tim Thatcher, Ryan Drago, Brian Cage, a handful more. I'm sure many more that you can.
Stoner Brothers, who now founded Hood Slam, which is a really big deal up here in the Bay Area. And what about the Reno Scum? They first formed as the Reno Scum at California Championship Wrestling under the guise of yours truly,
right,
Buddy Sotelo, under my tutelage, and we really did have an amazing lineup there, and for whatever reason you wanted to build the Fed around me, and me as the main, basically the Paul Heyman of your federation, and I've always been grateful for that, because when I think back of all the different feds that I've worked with, the most fun that I ever had was working for CCW. That was really something. And we did a lot together. I mean, people didn't know all the behind the scenes stuff that you and I worked on to make everything happen. And you're one of the very few promoters that I know that never wanted anyone to know that you were the promoter. You never put yourself in front of the camera. You never went, ringside to the shows. You were actually there, like collecting tickets and setting up merchandise. And most people thought you worked for JJ. Mm-hmm. That was that. So you're one of the few promoters that I know that really stood back from his promotion and didn't, launch yourself into the promotional angle. So what was that like for you, and how did that feel?
Well, I think, and I think a lot of that has borne out, as I've been in the military longer, just, recognizing the resources that you have around you. And, and I think sometimes, whether it's as the commander or as the owner of X, Y, or Z company, sometimes you have to be able to take a step back and really be able to take a look in order to you just have to have that ability to be objective and, look at things from a different point of view. If you get yourself too much into the weeds sometimes, and, and there are some times where you have to be in certain things. But I would say most of the time, if you have people around you that have a certain skill set then you have to utilize you have to use their skill set to its maximum. And I think, just circling back to what you were talking about as far as the success that you had, and you don't have to be blind to see, when somebody has just got this connection, whether it's as a heel, whether it's as as a baby face, as we'd like to say. If you've got somebody who truly is hated by the crowd, you don't even have, like, I would remember it, buddy, correct me if I'm wrong on this. You wouldn't even need to even say anything. You would just walk through the curtain. You had your suit on, you had your tie, you just kind of the way you swaggered out of the back.
Palm Pilot. Remember
you swaggered out of the back, and the way you looked at people, and sitting over there at the front door taking tickets, or standing in the back serving nachos to people. You have a pretty good view of what's going on around you, and people hated you. You'd come out and you would just kind of do the, this kind of stuff where you just this complete disdain for people and everything else. And it really came off as just this complete disdain. And then whomever you were coming out with, obviously they would basically play that up as well. So it was great, and it was a small enough venue where, the acoustics just amplified. So, you would be saying something, or you would be, chastising an audience member, and it would just amplify because of the acoustics in the building. And it was so small, and it was just like it echoed. And so it was great. So, here's Charles taking tickets or doing whatever needed to be done. I mean, who the hell am I to get in the middle of this great thing that's happening? And of course, JJ on the commentary. And it was nice because you would actually pull double duty. I mean, you would be doing commentary with JJ, or either your brother would be in the ring. I think there are a handful of times that JJ would be doing the announcing. But hey, look, if you've got good stuff happening and there's magic happening around you, whether it's in an arena or whether it's in a 250 person venue, just let the magic happen. There's no need for me in this case to get into the middle of it and try and get myself the boos or the applause or whatever, because it was not necessary at the time. You and JJ were doing everything that needed to happen for the crowd reaction. So I basically felt that it was in the best interest of the company to take a step back and basically assist you guys with whatever you needed, whether it was any resource during the show or whether it was a bottle of water. I mean, I felt that at that point, that was probably the best use for me, is just to make sure that the logistics were all straight and you guys were doing the entertainment part of it.
So tell me about what you feel was the high point of CCW for you and running CCW. What was your high point?
Well, I thought when we had the cage match, that was pretty cool. You don't really have too many times where we have these very small venues and small independent companies where they have, these cage matches that turn out as good as ours did. So that was wonderful. But I really think that the highlight, and again, going back to what we were talking about as far as storytelling, the Vinny Massaro
was Big Ugly against Vinny, right?
Yeah, the yes. Vinny Massaro Big Ugly stuff that went on for, gosh, correct me on this if I'm mistaken, buddy, but this went on for close to a year.
Yes.
And it was, as must-see TV or must-see in person, I guess, as you could get for an independent show. It was every time we were running, it was something with those two. And obviously their chemistry in the ring was wonderful because they've worked together a whole bunch. But it was so believable. And then, of course, when we had the payoff in which was the 325 person audience in the Portuguese Hall, it was great. And the way that all ended was
the cage match was in the studios.
Yeah,
but the other payoff that you're talking about was our Super Slam 1 year anniversary show that we did at the Portuguese Hall.
Right.
And that
TV. I don't remember.
Yeah, we got that on
It was
Comcast.
on
Okay, Comcast on demand.
Right, right.
Yeah, we were
Like
running.
I said earlier, you know, God bless it, because the technology that we have now available to us, I can only imagine, you know, between social media and putting out these clips and doing all of these promos and all these different vignettes that would, you know, certainly be available to us now with the technology. It's just a shame that that stuff was. We were probably, I would say, and I'm sure you would agree with this, buddy, we were probably 15 years ahead of our time in terms of, you know, the technology being there and everything else, because I think that we basically, the three of us, I would say that all three of us were on the same page. All three of us agreed, you know, I would say for the most part, you know, you're never going to have, you know, 100% on everything, but I would say that we all saw the same thing. We all believed in what we were doing, and we all knew our roles in terms of what we needed to do for the company in terms of moving the needle. And I think we all complemented each other in terms of our work ethic, in terms of our personalities and so forth. And I don't recall ever any of us stepping on each other's toes in terms of moving the ball forward. And I think we were very successful at doing that. Unfortunately, the Great Recession hit and technology just wasn't what it is today. I mean, to get 325 people,
it's a damn good crowd,
with no technology, well, very little technology, and no social media is pretty amazing.
You had to use NorCal Uncensored to, you know, promote, and just the website to do most of it.
That was it.
In fact, driving home, I drove down to Sausalito. I was driving back home, and my MP3 player just happened to jump over to the Stork theme, which was by Atomic Bitchwax, which was the theme to California Championship Wrestling, which was one of the things I contributed, was finding that theme, and I still was like, God, that's the best damn wrestling theme still to this day for any wrestling fan that I've ever been in, and it was an amazing high. So when did you feel like what was like really like the bitter end for you at CCW? What do you feel was the harbinger of doom for you to pull the plug on?
Gosh, I would say, no kidding, I would say the economy was the biggest driver of that. And I would say for me, just my schedule was very challenging at that time. Like I said, I was commuting back and forth between Newman and Southern California down to San Diego a lot. And so I was just coming back and forth a lot. I was obviously doing my military duty up in Fairfield. And so I was just doing a lot of traveling, and it just became just a lot. And, you know, and I just, for all of us, you know, I was spending a lot of time down in San Diego. You were in Nevada. You were in the Bay Area. JJ, of course, was in Newman. So you had three guys who were in three different locations, and it just logistically, it just became just more and more of a challenge. And I would say that the nail in the coffin for sure was the economy, because as you remember, you know, shortly thereafter, the crowds just started dwindling. And, you know, people that would normally be paying for tickets regularly were constantly reaching out to usually JJ, you know, hey, we don't have enough to buy the ticket this time. Hey, can we get a comp? And, you know, and it was just, you know, it may not seem like a lot, but you guys remember, you know.
You have a payroll. That's very difficult to maneuver.
Yeah, it is. But you guys remember the Great Recession was unlike anything that any of us had seen in our lifetime, and it was tough. So I would say that probably more than anything else was probably the nail in the coffin. I think.
Plus, one thing too is that you never wanted to run a show where you would stiff anyone for a payout. You paid off everybody. I do know that. There was never a show where you told any of the talent that showed up, oh, I can't pay you tonight because we didn't draw well. And I know that some of the shows took money out of your pocket directly so that you could pay off the workers.
Russ, I have to go. Let me ask Charles a question, because he sounds like a great guy. I wish I had. I might have met him at the shows, but I didn't know he was, you know, the owner promoter. But
I was the guy taking your ticket.
or maybe let me, get my press pass to shoot ringside.
Right.
With all the promotions we have now, and I ask this of people that are on top of everything, like you obviously have to be for your podcast. How do you budget your time? Mondays, 3 hours of WWE. Tuesdays, 2 hours of NXT, and if they have a dark side, there's another hour or two there. Wednesdays is and Tuesday now we've got 2 hours of MLW. Wednesdays is AEW, it's 2 hours. Thursdays, Impact, 2 to 3 hours. New Japan, 1 hour. Friday, obviously, 2 hours of SmackDown, 1 hour of Rampage. And we're not talking about to be the elite, these online shows or streamers like New Japan World or Peacock or a zillion other streamers. How do you budget your time and to have a life and still watch all that stuff? And I know people can tape it, but it seems to be a daily challenge. And some days I wish for a break. We didn't have this much when we had the Monday Night Wars. It was basically just Monday and then I don't know TBS on a Saturday, and now it's just too much wrestling. Even though it's all great stuff, but if you're going to watch and have to cover all of it, how do you, Charles, budget your time to get all that stuff and watch as much as you can?
So I do everything. I say that as I'm on my computer now, but I would say that probably 99% of what I watch is actually on my phone. I would probably say, I would say the big pay-per-view. So WrestleMania, of course, I'll watch it on a big TV and some of those. But I would say that everything that I do, so when we're editing the show for our podcast and we're shooting it and then editing it, everything's done on my phone. I have all the apps, Peacock, Ring of Honor, all the other ones. I'm looking at stuff constantly. I won't sit for the entire show. I'll catch clips of it, or maybe I'll watch an hour here and then I'll go back, maybe when I've got a little bit of downtime, maybe watch another half hour of it. But what I'll also do is I'll go on Twitter and I'll look at what are the big trending things that are going on. So if it says something with Sami Zayn and Jey Uso as an example, I'm like, okay, well, let me go back and watch that entire segment in its entirety. And then so I'll just go back and I'll use the resources that are out there that are pointing towards that being something that I should probably watch. And so I'll go in and look at the different stuff from MLW, Impact, all the different things, because I at least want to have some working knowledge of those. But you're right, Dr. Mike, that there's a lot of content out there and you just have to be mindful of your time, and which, I obviously do the best that I can with my schedule and, my responsibilities here at home. But I like to stay dialed in, and sometimes it'll just be a bite at a time, just so I could just continue to be familiar with the product. So like I said, 99% of what I watch is on my phone, and it makes it so much easier. Just, as with all of us, I'm sure that you guys have your phones with you all the time. And that's my life. I have my phone with me.
It's a blessing and a curse. I hope to talk to you soon. Russ, I've got to go. Guys, domo arigatou gozaimashite. And Charles, hope to talk to you soon. And Russ, I'll be with you next week.
All right. Take care.
Hey, Mike, it's great to have you on the show. And but we can continue on for a few minutes. We'll catch you next week, Mike. So we have a couple minutes we can still talk, because I wanted you to be able to talk about Suplex City.
Sure.
And tell our listeners what they can expect. I've been on the Suplex City podcast myself, but tell everyone who isn't familiar with Suplex City what it's all about.
Sure. So Suplex City Wrestling Podcast is a podcast that I've been very fortunate to be added to a couple months ago. It's a privilege working with both JJ and Scott, two guys that are super, super knowledgeable. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir if I need to say anything more to you about JJ and his knowledge of wrestling from not only the local perspective, but, the majors, all the historical stuff. And it's just, when we're doing the show, it's like listening to an encyclopedia talking about, just all these different events and so forth. And of course, Scott has been a longtime fan of pro wrestling. He's known JJ since JJ had moved out to Nebraska. And so I was just fortunate to draw the straw. I'm not sure if it was with logistics or whatever, but I was fortunate to be asked to be on. And so we cover just topics, trending topics, and, we'll take listener calls. And so, we have a YouTube channel that's doing really, really well. And we're on TikTok, Instagram. We just started a Facebook page. So we're doing all the different social media accounts. And so we just basically, we're on every week. And so we're talking about the different topics of the day that are important. We, like I said, take emails from people that write into us asking questions. And so we basically just do our show weekly. And, so we cover wrestling. It's something that all of us absolutely love. So, we're doing that. So, and if people want to listen, obviously they could go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Suplex City Pod. And then all of our social media channels are all @Suplex City Pod. I forgot to mention, and Twitter as well. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to just do something that we all love, buddy, which is wrestling and talk about it. And so, and again, as you mentioned, you've been on the show, so you know how the format works on all of that. But it's a privilege, as it is. Thank you. And I really want to reiterate how appreciative I am of you to invite me on. I know JJ had called me earlier today, and I couldn't be more thrilled and more privileged. I know it's been, unfortunately, a long time since you and I have seen each other in person, so of course it's good to see you, but I've always enjoyed working with you. I thought what we did at California Championship Wrestling was magic. Timing.
It was the greatest time of my life. I mean, except for getting thrown over the top rope and then landing on my head and almost dying. Other than that, and my shoulder has never been the same. My right shoulder has never been the same since taking that bump. But other than that, CCW was the greatest time of my life. I never had more fun as a human being than the stuff that I did for CCW. Just the storylines that we did, the shows that we did. Look, we had some incredible heartbreak. Remember you and I remember you and I getting together and talking after that first show had been canceled because those stupid jerks over at the Alameda County Fairgrounds dicked with us and said we didn't have enough insurance to run the show, even though they'd said that the insurance was fine. And, they waited until we were about a third full before they told us that we couldn't do the show. And I thought at that point you were just going to pull up stakes and say, that's it. I can't promote. I can't do another show like this. But you rolled up your sleeve. We waited a couple months. We did it again, and it was a huge success. And then we had some high points like that summer, the Super Slam show for the anniversary, which was it was so well booked. All three, all the matches for that, and I was part of 3 of those matches. Remember, I was managing the Bad Apples. I was managing. I had that turn where Vinny went and took on Big Ugly and turned on him, and we surprised the crowd, and it was just a tremendous. It was like a really well booked thing because you wanted a year's worth of storylines to culminate at that particular point in time, and it hit everything in a crescendo, like the way the old WrestleManias used to be, where they really were like the culmination of all these stories that came together to make one really fabulous show that you couldn't see anywhere else. And we did some great stuff, and all the creative stuff that we did with the website and the TV show. And you got me started with what I was doing with the Sotelo Spotlight. This whole podcast that goes on now. had its start with me interviewing the different wrestlers at CCW and doing the spotlight that we featured on our website. So, it was great stuff. And
I think too, really quickly, buddy,
sure,
I think the other thing too was, we see now some of these guys that used to be there wrestling for us now on TV doing wonderful things. And I think at the end of the day, and you touched upon it earlier when Dr. Mike was on, is that we were very respectful to the wrestlers and we treated them with respect. We paid them. We tried to get the back area as spacious as possible for them so that at least they could, be able to stretch out and do what they needed to do. I think we were able to really maximize the space that we had. And I think we did the best that we could with the circumstances, with the economy, of course, being a real killer. But I think some of the limitations that we had with the technology and so forth. But considering, I think maybe the only thing that we didn't do was write a book called How to Run a Wrestling Promotion on a Shoestring Budget. And when I say a shoestring, I'm talking as thin of a shoestring as possible. Yeah, that's the only thing we didn't do, buddy, was write that book, because I think we could certainly give a lesson, a master class in running a promotion on a shoestring budget, which we did. But hey, we were the first that were on Comcast On Demand, which was pretty amazing at the time. And considering that people were having to make that trek all the way to Newman, because a lot of, the people that were wrestling in the Bay Area, it was right around the corner for them. So it was much easier. But the fact that we had such top tier people, talent, wrestlers coming all the way out to Newman speaks volumes of the kind of product we were putting out in terms of the wrestling, in terms of being mindful of their safety, and as far as doing what we could, in terms of pay. And I think we're competitive, as I'm sure you would agree. So I think overall, I think it was a success. Unfortunately, it ended sooner than we would have liked, but unfortunately, there were just external factors that were out of our control.
Yeah, no, I remember how much I hated that drive out to Newman because it seemed to take forever. But on the drive back, because all of us would be talking about the show, either my brother, when he would do the announcing, and I used to pick up the refs on the way out, I'd pick up the other guys that were doing the reffing and so forth. We'd have so much talk after the show about what went right, what went wrong, what we want to do for booking in the next show and all that stuff. There was so much creative energy. And that was really, when you look back on it and just like what we had in that small bottle package at CCW was really something incredibly special. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. Go ahead and give out your social media links for everyone and so they can get a hold of you if they want.
Sure. They could find me at Charles C. Marquez, and they could find me on Instagram and Twitter. And as I had mentioned, the @Suplex City Pod for all of our social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And then for our YouTube channel, they could find us at youtube.com/@Suplex City Pod. So they could find us there as well.
Well, this is fantastic, and it is really good to see you after 15 years. And we'll have you and JJ on, and maybe we could even do like a CCW reunion one of these days. We can grab a couple other guys and have just one big CCW, show where we just talk about all of our experiences at CCW.
Well, on that note, buddy, yeah, and you were mentioning some of the referees. I remember Toby specifically, and then I remember the kid. I want to say he was an aspiring singer, and I remember he would come to our shows, and then I want to say you picked him up a few times. There was him, then of course Owen, and a handful of other people that I know are still around. It would be wonderful to have a CCW reunion to reminisce about all of those things and just some high points that maybe they had as well.
Well, it's great, and it is good to see you after so many years, Charles.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having
much
me, buddy.
for being on the show. That's all we have time for this week. The hour goes by so quickly, but it's really great having you on, and we'll have you on again in the near future.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Charles. Good night, everyone.